my mother left once before and then came back, and this was the second time, which I think was the permanent one. I was getting ready to go to school, and I kissed her goodbye and got on the bus and left, and that was the end of it. And I came home and she wasn't home. I asked my uncle where she was, and he didn't know. The next day, she wasn't there, and she never was there anymore.
It hits you. It hits you hard, you know. Something like that happens, like disappearing off this earth, and wonder what happened to her, you know. It was hard to, you know, to grasp it, you know, that she was gone.
After she had disappeared that first winter, we decided to go to Florida with another couple for a couple of weeks. And then we got back, and the rumor was that we had gone down there to meet with her, you know? And we had no idea of even doing anything like that.
Back home, when I was during the weekend or something, I'd get a phone call, but there'd be nobody there. It would ring, I'd pick it up, hello, and once in a while I'd say, Lou, is that you? And they hang up. There was no more calls after a while.
Everything was a big secret back then. Everything was a big secret. If you asked somebody something, they didn't know. I don't know. I don't know. Nobody knew. You couldn't get anything at anybody.
There was nothing ever said to us as children, you know. Don't say a word, you know. Just, you know, it'll go away if you don't talk about it. And it still hasn't gone away. I've always asked, and I always got, let it go. Let it go. And I'm like, but let it go. The only person that really spoke to me about it in any type of conversation was Uncle Walter, my dad's brother. And we were talking about it, and I said, what do you think? And his thing was, well, she's probably gone. Really would like to know what happened to her. And that was the extent of the conversation.
Nothing.
The mother never confided in her.
Nothing.
It's just Steffi.
Neither one of them, Aunt Steffi or she.
They spoke amongst each other.
Yeah.
But never involved my wife. I don't know what the reasoning behind it.
Well, I wasn't a sibling, so I guess they figured that,
Well,
you know, I'd have no
That's
interest
true.
in it.
I grew up quickly. You know, I grew up very fast. Number one, the house that my grandfather had didn't have any heat. All it had was a coal stove and a wood stove and a gas stove. It had no hot water. The phone that it had didn't even have a rotary dial. You picked it up and the operator said, who do you want? So and it had World War II blackout shades on the window. So you were living in the past. And so I learned quickly to put coal in a coal stove, put wood in a wood stove. And they did not want me to stay there come wintertime. I went from Josephine's house to Beanie Zahoski, Beanie and Joey's, and I stayed there for a while. And then finally, well, they had 5 kids, Beanie and Joey, and it was like, what the hell, you know? They resented me, those kids. You can't blame them. There's 5 of them. And they were like, what are you doing here, you know?
Sandy had her own way.
Yeah.
I mean, she would go upstairs and slam the door on the other her cousins' faces, but that's being a kid, you know, 12 years old, would expect.
It was hard, you know. We had 3 bedrooms upstairs, and there's 5 kids in there. You know, 3 girls and 2 boys. Yeah. Then she comes in.
It was between a rock and a hard place, really. So I went home and I thought, just make it through high school and get the hell out. So that's what I did.
Hey, so I'm going through, you left that bag with those photo albums, and I was going through, and in one of them, did you know the communion picture was in one of those? No, it's the one where you're in it with your mom, you know, that one that we really liked that your mom's friend sent, but your mom's cut out of the picture.
Oh,
What do you think that's all about?
I might have done that maybe.
Oh, really?
I might have done that in the beginning. Yeah, being upset
Oh, wow.
that she left.
Mm-hmm.
I think I probably did that. Because there was some pictures that I took out of the album. I remember being in my room at my aunt's house and being very upset that she was gone. And I remember taking some pictures out of the album, and I may have done that. But it was unusual for me. Why would I just cut her out of it, though?
Yeah, I don't know. I just saw it and I found it striking because I'm familiar with the picture, you know?
Yeah, I could have, or maybe not. But I know most of the pictures, if she was in it, I would take them out of the book. And I don't know what I did with those pictures.
Yeah.
I was only 11. But I was, you know, you're going through the phase. I was mad.
Mm-hmm.
I was mad.
In May of 2012, I went to a birthday party for my friend, and it turned out that his wife's family were related to Louise. And a number of them, when they found out I had been a state trooper, came over and said, "Do you know these two troopers?" And it was Tom Kobe, an investigator, and Dick Fairchild, another investigator. I said, "I know them both. Tom, unfortunately, is dead, and Dick is living upstate." So that's how I got involved. They then told me about Louise and what had happened to her. She'd disappeared. And they asked me if there was anything I could do to help them. Well, the first thing I did was check. I have a program that I use to check people's names and whereabouts. I wanted to make sure she wasn't living somewhere else. So I did that first. That was done in May 2012. And from there, obviously, I found she wasn't anywhere. So then, the latter part of May, I contacted retired investigator Dick Fairchild in upstate New York. And I said, "Dick, do you remember this case?" And he says, "The one from Cutchogue?" And I says, "Yeah." He said, "I remember it well."
He had not forgotten it. I think it's really stuck in his mind how horrible the case was and that this woman had been murdered and that nothing ever came of it. I think he was pretty horrified by that. Fairchild and his partner Tom Kobe got involved in this case at about October 24th, 1966, about 2 weeks after Louise disappeared, when Louise's sister went to the state trooper barracks in Riverside and filed a missing persons report. The reason the sisters did go to the state police is that they believed that the South Old Town police hadn't done anything.
It was a mess from the start. They got involved in it late. Apparently, she was originally reported missing to the South Old Town police. And that after about 2 or 3 weeks, the family said they were doing nothing. So they decided to contact the state police about it. I think that was October 24th of 1966. On the 25th, Dick told me that he and Tom Kobe came to Sagaponack and interviewed the family there.
And they start talking to people. They talked to Pietrewicz. They came over to Cutchogue and talked to him, and he made it clear to them that he didn't care if his wife was alive or dead.
He was very upfront with them. He said, "Look," he says, "my wife was cheating on me. She was cheating with this guy, Bill Boken, a South Old Town police officer, and I'm glad she's missing." He says, "She's ruined my name in the town, and I just don't want any part of her anymore." And after talking to him, they came away convinced he had nothing to do with it.
In Kobe and Fairchild's work on the case, they both leaned strongly towards Boken having been responsible for Louise's disappearance.
According to Dick, there was no doubt in his mind that Bill Boken was responsible for the murder and disappearance of Louise. He based it as probable cause on the fact that in one of the interviews with Mrs. Boken, she alleged that she had been beaten by him repeatedly, and on one occasion he pinned her to the floor and started to strangle her. And he says, "If you keep it up, I'm going to strangle you and I'll bury you next to the bitch in the basement."
One of the things that we did as a part of this project in our research was to go through the town website to see if we could find any reference to Bill Boken. As I was going through that, one date really jumped out at me, and it said October 7th, 1966. That's exactly one day after Louise was last seen alive. I opened it up and it was minutes from a town board meeting, and they were accepting Bill Boken's resignation. So the very day after Louise disappeared, he resigned from the police department. The resolution was approved unanimously by the town board, and they said they accepted his resignation with regret, was the way it was worded. And they also agreed to pay him accrued leave that he had earned upon his resignation. So after 9 years, he stepped down from the police department, and it happened to be the day after Louise was last seen alive.
Investigator Fairchild's advised me that they felt she was alive until October 13th or thereabouts in 1966. That they had traveled to Florida. Fairchilds and Kobe were able to contact an airlines and verify the fact that they were on a flight to Florida and that they had also returned from Florida.
He believed the two of them went to Florida on some kind of jaunt and came back together, and that somewhere after their return from Florida, Louise was murdered and her body dumped somewhere. In between that time, somewhere between the 6th of October and the 24th of October, Louise's purse was found by the side of the road, the eastbound lanes, the Pine Barrens.
And it was their original theory that she might have been murdered prior to that spot, and the evidence was dumped out at that point. You know, in other words, the purse and or whatever belongings they also found.
They could have searched that area right away. Maybe they would have found her. Or at least interrogated him, and maybe he would have broke. But no. See ya. Have a nice life.
We have yet to find any record as to who found it and who turned it in, but it ends up in the custody of the state police barracks in Riverside because Louise's sister picks it up there. And in that purse is a World War II bond, a Social Security card, and a scrap of paper. It looks like almost a piece of mail that came to the house in Sagaponack, where someone, presumably Louise, had written the name and phone number of a doctor in Glen Cove. Their feeling was that she was going there because she was pregnant. And beyond that, we don't know a thing. But that's important to note in terms of motive for Boken, because when Fairchild and Kobe call that doctor, he knows Louise is pregnant. So he knew that much. And to them, that meant a great deal in terms of thinking out of a motive for Boken. So that made them lean closer to Boken.
I had heard that she may have been pregnant, but did they find out who this doctor was? Was he a gynecologist? They don't know for sure whether she was pregnant or not.
Judy Terry was a longtime public official here in Southold, longtime town clerk. She was, to her disadvantage, married to Bill Boken. And I reached out to her, wanting very much for her to be involved in this project, to let her know what we're doing, let her know, what direction we're going in. She said, "Steve, I just can't go there. It was a terribly painful time in my life." And I told her we would respect that. It was clear in that very brief conversation that this is a period in her life that is just a horror show.
She gave a statement to police at one point that said that he had brought Louise over to their house in Southold, that that Louise had to use the restroom. He stopped by. Judy was home, He brings her in, drags her into the house. She seems scared. These are all things that Judy told the police that if we were given the chance to speak to her for this story, she might have been able to elaborate on further.
The state police have said to me, and they have said to Sandy, Louise's daughter, that the 1966-1967 file has been purged per department policy. In other words, it aged out at a certain point and was destroyed. That file, if it exists still, would be incredible to get. It would give us a lot of answers.
I even wrote a check for $15 to get the information. They sent the check back and said, all the information has been purged. And I said, I thought it was an open case still. But that was that.
And what would be in that file? This would be fantastic. Colby and Fairchild's notes of all the interviews they did. Their interview with Pietrewicz, what did he really say? That first interview with Boken, that they came to believe he was lying. And who else in town did they talk to? All those notes would have been in that file. It seems strange to me that in an open case of an obvious murder, a file would be destroyed.
One of the other interesting discoveries that we made in our research was Josephine, Louise's sister, telling the courts that the closest we ever came to finding my sister was 1 week after she disappeared. We went and spoke to her boyfriend, and he said, I left her on the streets of Brooklyn. The Southold Town Police approached Judy Terry, who had been married to Bill Boken at the time Louise disappeared, and asked her questions about that time. One of the things she says was that at some point in the fall of 1966, he left for a brief period of time, and before he came home, he contacted her and said he was in New York City. He was at the Dixie Hotel in Times Square, and she went and met him there, spent a day with him at the hotel, and then he convinced her that it was time for him to come home. About a year later, he was gone, and that was the last time his wife and his children ever saw him, was a year after Louise disappeared.
They decided, Dick and Tom, that they were going to arrest Boken for murder. When they got out here, it was determined that Boken was in a mental institution already, that the Southold police arrested Bill Boken on a charge of beating his wife, charged him with assault, but somehow or another he wound up in a mental institution.
On December 17th, 1967, Judy Boken, William Boken's wife, said she was beaten and threatened by her husband. On the morning of the 19th, the police department called police officer Barney Harris, who was coming on duty at 4 o'clock, that he had a job to do, and that job was to arrest Bill Boken for assault of his wife. Late in the afternoon, on the 19th of December, 1967, Barney Harris and a 7th Squad detective go to the Boken house. They bring him outside, they put him in the car.
Being that I knew Bill real well, if I can recall, I didn't want to handcuff him, but Turk Edwards, the 7th Squad detective, says, look, this is our procedure. Mm-hmm. He says we have to handcuff him.
They go from there to the home in Mattatuck of Town Justice Ralph Tuttle. Barney thinks it's about 8 o'clock they get there. The actual police report says it's more like 10 o'clock when they get there. So it's rather late for a very unusual proceeding in someone's living room. There's no assistant district attorney present, and Boken does not have an attorney present. The paperwork to commit Boken to Central Islip Psychiatric Facility has already been filled out even before they arrived. It was almost a foregone conclusion. They get there, some words are exchanged, Justice Tuttle commits him to Central Islip. Somewhere in that chronology, perhaps the next day, Fairchild drives to Cutchogue and Peconic for the express purpose of finding Boken to arrest him for the murder of Louise Pietrewicz. He gets here and finds out he's not here anymore. Where is he? He's in Central Islip's psychiatric facility. And I've talked to 2 criminal defense lawyers and the Office of Court Administration about that, and they all say that being in that institution would have prevented Fairchilds from just walking in the door and arresting him anyway. It also would have raised really serious legal questions going forward had charges been brought, because now you have someone who's been found to be mentally ill. How can he defend himself? How can he assist his counsel?
Dick was very upset about it, repeatedly told me about it, that it just wasn't right. He said, how did they tip him off? They must have tipped him off. And normally on an assault charge, you get arrested, you're arraigned, and you may possibly put in the county jail or released in your own recognizance. If he was put in the county jail, the state police would have been right on top of him. Putting him in a mental institution makes it very difficult.
By all appearances, this action that December 1967 stopped the state police investigation, stopped any possibility of an arrest. And what's even more interesting is that Boken then becomes kind of a missing person himself. He just goes off into the hinterlands.
I know she's not coming back. I know she's gone.
My father says, I'm absolutely sure of it, that Patrick killed Louise.
There's something oddly fitting about the demise of Bill Boken.
He doesn't want to give his address.
If we could find Louise's body and bring her home, I think it would go a long way for the family.